So, back to the racing and the European Championships in France.
Welcome to the 1991 National Points Series, which proved to be as mucky as they come. We'll be taking a look at all 7 rounds from the mud in March to the dust of Dalby.
We'll also be seeing how the Brits fared against the rest of the world and finding out what makes a top race bike. But let's start by introducing you to the main contenders.
With a bike riding style ideally suited to mountains, Tim is reigning national champion, world hill climb champion and bronze medalist in the world cross country. He is the man to beat.
Tim, the 1989 champion, has used his motocross and cyclocross skills to become one of the top contenders. With more consistency, he stands a great chance again this year.
Friend, rival and former teammate of Gould, David is a road and cyclocross pro and is targeting the #1 spot on his eagerly awaited return to full-time mountain biking.
Comfortably in the British top 5, tough Fred Salmon, another professional, has now been mountain biking for 3 years. With Gould and his team, Peugeot has easily dominated the domestic scene.
Former king of the mountains in the milk race, Barry peaked impressively at the end of 1990. Together he and David will be driving for top team status for rally.
Having regained the national cyclocross title this year, Chris is obviously in good off-road form. Famous for being a strong finisher, this Yorkshire lad is always an exciting rider to watch.
After years at the top in cyclocross in 1990, Steve Dowse moved into mountain biking. He's one of the smoothest operators on fat tyres but is still waiting to break into the top 3.
100% commitment to mountain biking in and out of the saddle. Sally is defending champion and one of the first professional women in Britain. Her background is in top-class running and triathlon.
Her 4th year in mountain biking, Deb's strengths are difficult courses, downhilling and consistency. Even as her rivals increase in number, she holds her position at the top.
Sian lives in the shadow of Snowdon and rides the local hills for training. Also Wales's best fell runner, she has an awesome strength but has yet to commit herself fully to mountain biking.
Much publicised and very determined, Rally's first female pro has been riding mountain bikes for just 1 year. She comes from the Lake District and is a former county swimming champion.
Dave McMullen waited to turn 40 to hit the veterans with a vengeance. A disillusioned long-time cyclocross and road racer, he thinks mountain bike freedom is where it's at.
Another young man in the over 40s class, Les, finished 7th in the experts in 1989 but missed out the whole of last year with a knee injury. Can he find such success again?
Carl progressed from riding a BMX bike to become junior mountain bike champion in 1989. Although still eligible to ride juniors, he has chosen to ride expert this year to improve his endurance.
Sam, an ex-BMXer, has great handling skills and has added to them new climbing strengths. His father coached him to his best performances at the end of last year.
In his 2nd season of mountain biking, Richard was runner-up in the Junior National Cyclocross Championships and has made a name for himself by racing junior and pro elite on the same day.
Paul starts the year as an unknown quantity with only wins in minor series to his name. His sporting background is in swimming and he's a steamer going uphill.
Enough of the chat, let's see the action, starting with round 1 at Blandford Forum.
We'll be concentrating on 6 categories, usually spread over 3 races at each event, starting with the juniors. That's the 16 to 18-year-olds. This is a category with a huge range of abilities, from those just starting out in mountain biking to those who have been competing in one sport or another for a number of years. They can often give the professionals a run for their money, and if you stood beside them you wouldn't believe they were only 18. But what gives them away is the way they behave. In atrocious conditions, with the bikes hardly rideable, Richard Thackeray took an early and decisive lead, no doubt benefiting from his cyclocross background. The faster you went, the less mud stuck, so you could keep going where others failed. Oh, it's not fair. By the end of the race, Richard had opened a clear lead over his nearest challenger, Sam Humphrey. Sam was showing that last year's end-of-season form was not a flash in the pan, as he too opened a big gap on the next rider, local lad Nigel Parkinson. Did Richard ride most of the climbs?
First lap I did, but then it was getting too hard. You just couldn't push big enough gear to get you up.
What about the competition?
Left him for dead. Didn't see much room.
Next race off, and always the largest field, is the Sportsmen. This year sponsored by Animal. Early leaders were Glenn Turner, the 1990 Observed Trials champion. That's where you hop over rocks and the like without putting your foot down, with Scott Robinson in second in his first year out of the juniors. The Sports is another varied ability category, with a number of competitors from other sports as well as roadies all finding their feet in mountain biking. Also out there are some enthusiastic and experienced part-timers watching for some fun and good competition. There's a women's race in all categories too. In the Sports, Liz Everall led all the way despite an argument with some barbed wire. She eventually pulled clear of second place Tracy Hardcastle to win comfortably. The mud was taking a huge toll on the bikes. The riders' concern was to keep the gears as well as their eyes as clear as possible, but with little success. The conditions meant that the lap times were much longer than expected, so the races were shortened. And in this category, at the start of the season, very few riders know each other. Add to that large helpings of mud, and it becomes impossible to know whether they were lapping or just overtaking each other. And when Alan Ford came over to win, he went unnoticed, as everyone thought Glenn Turner was still out front. The commentator even proclaimed Glenn the winner as he crossed the line.
Wins in the sports class here today at the surf track. Ladies and gentlemen, is this going to be fair? No, it's not.
In the true spirit of mountain biking, despite acts of God on both bike and weather, most riders were determined to finish.
All the other gear, unfortunately, not enough time to repair that.
Whatever.
And that blowout at the back end.
The day's final race had 6 categories, with top category pro elite as well as experts and veterans in both men's and women's classes, though not all starting at the same time. Marin's pro elite women rider Sian Roberts had the advantage of being an ex-fell runner. She took an early lead over Rally's Caroline Alexander, who is one of only 3 pro women mountain bikers. However, a muddly match soon took Caroline out of contention. And it was Orange's new pro elite rider Janet Wilkinson who took second ahead of a number of better known riders. However, the second woman over the line was expert winner Debbie Thompson from Diamondback. Debbie is also a marathon runner, so she's not adverse to picking up the bike and legging it. In the men's race, David Baker, now riding for Rally, headed the field. With the Peugeots and particularly Tim Gould not racing, the rallies were dominant, with Barry Clark here in second. Since only the best 4 results of 7 races would count towards the riders' final results, some of the top riders could afford to miss 1 or 2 races. They must have been psychic about this one. The Pro Elite category consists of a number of established riders, whereas the expert class is for those still on the way up, such as Carl Sturgeon, who prefers the longer expert courses to the junior ones. As the mud started to dry out, it became even cloggier and riding got harder. However, David remained beautifully fluid both on and off the bike. He used all his cross experience to gradually open up the lead over his teammate. Barry had continued his improvements from the end of last season and was well clear of Dawes' Steve Dowse, who in third was expected to do well on this type of course. Sian had increased her lead to 5 minutes by the time she crossed the line to collect the first winning 16 points of the season, while in the experts, Carl had a comfortable enough lead to enjoy himself despite the mud.
Thank you.
So David collected 26 points in his first National Series win since 1988, while fourth place Adrian Timmis allowed one-lapped expert the satisfaction of beating him in the sprint for the line. And Steve Dowse showed his fortunes of war that barbed wire again.
Long after the winners and losers of this event are forgotten, one memory impregnated in the riders' minds, as well as in their kit, is the mud.
Hi, so as promised, we said we'd have a look at the bikes that have been raced this year. Let's kick off with Jonathan Watson's Scott Super Evolution. Let's start with the frame. It's a 7000 series aluminium frame, elevated chainstay design that gives loads of mud clearance, especially behind the chainstays. This is especially afforded by the E-stay box section chainstays that offer better stiffness for the rear end and a better heel clearance for the rider. Gearing, standard Shimano, 7-speed, rear end, 12-28 block, 24, 36, 46 chainrings. On odd occasions, Joss put a bigger chainring on for downhill racing. Front end, chrome ollie fork, as standard. Jonathan's also been riding this year the Extra Shock fork, which is a suspension fork from Scott, but it's horses for courses, and sometimes the weight is more critical than the suspension. So at the moment, he's riding the stock fork. Handlebar setup, the bike started life with the SLR Plus system, servo wave brakes and low profile cantilevers. There's a few changes made here through the season, and Jonathan switched back to top mount shifters, and at the moment he's prototype testing some self-energizing brakes for Scott. These are a little bit more powerful and a bit more responsive than the previous brakes that he had on the bike. Wheels, a very important part of the bike. All the Scott bikes have stainless steel spokes, and we've got good rims on this bike. Joff's been riding the same wheels all year. A lot of people using SPDs now, of course. When he's got muddy conditions and he prefers to use his cross shoes, he'll stick with the standard XT pedal. But for a lot of the season, he's been riding the SPD pedal system from Shimano with the Shimano shoe. The gears and brakes are operated by top-rooted cables. So what you've got here is an elevated chainstay bike, lightweight aluminium, race-proven.
Round 2 at Margam Park in South Wales, and the growing field of veterans, that's the 40 to 50-year-olds, and the new over 50s Masters category was led out by Mick Ives, last year's vet champ, who had now advanced to Masters. They were followed a couple of minutes later by the juniors, with a field of nearly 100 riders, a good sign for the future of mountain biking.
There we go.
By the end of a technical wooded section, round 1 winner Richard Thackeray was out front. He and second place Sam Humphrey made it over this bridge with style, which wasn't the case for all riders, even if they were riding a nice pace bike.
Come on, Alan, you're right.
You can see how easy it is to ruin some very expensive equipment if you don't get it just right. If you're not sure, play safe and walk it.
When was that, just then?
Approaching the end of the first 7-mile lap, Jeff Standley was leading the vets. He had 2 minutes over the well-fancied Les Lloyd, but that was about to increase considerably as Les goes down with a puncture. In the juniors, there was an even more surprising leader. Paul Lazenby upped the pressure on the climb, and the chase was on as Richard and Sam flew down the descent, leaving Les struggling with his tyre. Back up the hill, Darren Barkley and the rest of the juniors had found a bump to play with. On the way down, there wasn't so much fun to be had in the ruts. Well, there was for the spectators. Lap 2, the final climb. Richard had reeled back in Paul, dropped Sam and passed the leading vet to head for his second victory and a perfect score of 52 points. Jeff wasn't worrying about Richard or anyone else. He was on a solo ride, well clear of the rest of the field. But the battle was on for second in the juniors. Sam got his wheel back ahead of Paul's and made safe his second place with a very fast final descent, having made Paul suffer on the way up. Les finally fixed his puncture and moved back up into second place, but too late for any challenge to Jeff, though he did manage to pass 5th place junior Alan Gunner. Great fun mountain biking, isn't it? Next off, the Annual Challenge Sports Race. You don't want to get stuck at the back of that lot, so for those that can, there's a rush to the front before the technical section into the woods. And not far behind was the women's race, with a field larger than the total number of women racing just 2 years ago. The chasing group in the men's race didn't see hide nor hair of the winner after the first couple of minutes. Nor did we, for that matter. But come on, guys, it's not the winning, it's the taking part that counts. Isn't it?
Woo!
Although the sports riders are not as fit as those in the top categories, they don't usually have the time to train. Downhill and technically they are often as good. But not always.
There were many eager spectators watching the men's Pro Elite races. For the first time, David Baker was up against his ex-teammate Tim Gould, the national champion, long-time friend and riding partner. In the women's race, much was expected of Caroline Alexander, and with the conditions more normal than Blandford, how would the other established riders do against her? David and Tim, in a world of their own, rapidly pulled away from the field. No doubt this was a novel experience for them in Britain. They had a race on. With two such hallowed riders doing battle, the crowd had a respectful silence as they passed, often with only a polite clap or cheer. Off the leader's pace, but clear of the rest, Barry Clark was showing that he was the boy most likely to break the David-Tim stranglehold on British mountain biking. Chris Young and Fred Salmon were contesting fourth. Till now it was unheard of to find Fred this far down in a British race, a sign of the strengthening Pro Elite category. Alpine Stars Tim Davis gets a water bottle from his father as he leads Peugeot's new signing Nicky Craig up the steep climb. Also showing strongly were Agent Timmis, whose first mountain bike race was here last year, and the 1990 junior champion Jake Elliott, now riding for GT, followed by Dawes' Steve Dowse and another just up from the juniors, Scott's Jason Shackleton. Caroline finally seemed to be showing the form expected of her from her winter's training. She'd apparently been doing more than 200 miles a week. She was untouchable on the climbs, quickly pulling out a huge lead over the old enemies Deb Morell from Daihatsu Off-Road and Marin Sean Roberts. They were left to do battle between themselves. Though they had to keep an eye out behind them, as Janet Wilkinson was showing that her second at Blandford was no flash in the pan. Halfway up the main climb, Tim and David were still together and passing sports riders that were still out there suffering from the previous race. It must really hurt when those two go past you at twice your speed. On the long, fast descent they might have swapped places, but there was still no gap developing. Barry was having a lonely ride in third with only lapped riders for company, while Chris had pulled out a slight lead over Fred and the rest of the chasers as they weaved their way through the tail-end sports and lapped expert riders. Hi there, Jason. Gary Coleman was just ahead of brother Glenn, who got the better of him in the mud of round one. As they started the final lap, David and Tim were still wheel to wheel, and a sprint finish looked likely. But not for long. By the stream out of the woods, David had finally broken away from Tim. Meanwhile, Caroline, well clear in the women's race, was looking to make it a good day for Raleigh, who was showing strength in depth with Barry safe in third, biomechanical. In the battle for second, Sean was just too strong on the long climb, opening up a lead of over 2 minutes on Deb. The first three may have been well away, but for the rest, positions were constantly changing. Adrian Timmis had moved up to fourth ahead of Chris, who is usually a strong finisher, but he was shortly to be caught by Tim Davis. Approaching the final climb, and it looked as if everything had been decided up front, but the fight was still on for fourth. Isla Roundtree, another professional, was about to be caught by Janet, with Sally Hibbert, a third pro, who was well down the chain jam soon after the start, passing Isla near the finish. David made good his break, with his early season racing obviously working to his advantage, as it was a tired-looking Tim who led Deb up the final climb. Not completely forgetting the experts, Carl Sturgeon took his second emphatic victory, 6 minutes clear of the rest of the field, while Caroline was justly delighted, having for the first time beaten all her British rivals, and David made it a rally double as he too chalked up his second win.
Hey, fair.
But you needn't lap me.
We'll love you.
Tim, they fought it out neck and neck all the way round.
Historic moment this, though Tim might not think so. The first time he's been squarely beaten in a British mountain bike race without a mechanical problem. Sean there coming through quietly also in second.
I raced here at Easter, so I knew what to expect. And I thought if I do something here, then I've got no chance, because it's open. I think it defies the law of gravity, how there can be so much up and so little down. But I really enjoyed it.
I don't suppose you've had a head-to-head like that for a long time.
No, we're having a good race. We were like flying down the descent. It was quite good fun.
Did you ever think you were going to catch him back on that hill once he started moving?
I thought I was early on. Yeah, I started to gain on him, and then he must have looked around and put pressure on again, probably.
Did you relax it over the last bit once you knew you'd lost it?
Well, I think you just your morale goes a bit when you see you can't gain it, and then you know, it all seems to hurt 10 times more.
I was going through quite well through on the woods. Tim was struggling on the technical side of it, but I felt confident all day. I felt like I'd got the edge on him quite early on, but it was good, like both of us going around together, and it was just like the old days really. Both of us like doing a bit of work together, but it was a good race.
Well, I'm a happy man, obviously, with Dave Baker just winning another round of the BMBF. And here I have Barry Clark's bike. And basically the Dynatech is a new formula whereby the brazing element has gone out of making the frame, and it's a bonding process with the alloy lugs, and we're able to literally put in any type of tubing from steel, metal matrix, aluminium, bond it into this lug, and because of the bonding process it needs less heat than the brazing, it actually makes the frame 20% stronger and more rigid, which means literally more power to the pedals. On the equipment front, we're very privileged to be sponsored by Campagnolia. Excellent group set. The chain sets we normally ride in 26 in a ring, 34 middle and a 50 outer, with an 8-speed cassette block going from 12 to a 26, and we carry a various range of sprockets, normally something 28, 30 sprockets, and even as small as 24 for the front, just for the mountainous courses which we sometimes encounter in Europe. We've got a various sort of selection of stems that the team are using. Dave Baker rides a 1.5 Salsa stem on this particular bike. Barry Clark has got the Flex titanium, really, really light, together with the Onza bar ends. Again, various riders are going for the different types of pedals. Barry Clark, for instance, has got the standard Campagnolia rat trap pedal. One or two of the riders are experimenting with the SPDs, having some great success with them, but also encountering a little bit of problems when it's muddy. We use a very light quick release skewer by Ringle, and we use a lot of titanium bolts from SRP, which gives the bike a very, very impressive weight and great to handle. So it's got everything that we as a pro team need.
May, and we finally get some sun for round 3 at Newnham Park in Devon. Streaming away here with the juniors for fastest starting of all categories. Mudcam, our on-bike camera, goes down the steepest descent on the course, a loose rocky chute, taken slightly more tentatively than the first man down, series leader Richard Thackeray, followed by Sam, Paul and Darren Barkley. You can see just how tricky it was. Any overuse of the front brake and the bike threatened to kick the rear wheel up and catapult you over the bars. People pull some great faces when they're concentrating. Flying down here in his first vets race was Dave McMullen, followed by the 1-2 from the last round, Jeff and Les. Dave, in his second year of mountain bike racing, increased his early lead to finally win by over 4 minutes from Les, who took a tumble on the first lap, but still came in 3.5 minutes ahead of the third man. Back to Mudcam as we drop into the woods on an off-camber descent down to the second river crossing. Where we pick up the leading juniors halfway through the race. Again, Richard looked unbeatable coming down here very smoothly. This is the sort of single-track mountain bikers crave. Sam and Paul have got to know each other well in their battles for second. With all the leading juniors giving a lesson in different ways of cornering. We pick up Mudcam again, going through a series of bomb holes. To get through these, you had to be in the right gear, keep your momentum going, but not overcook it. Shock horror! First through on the last of 3 laps was Sam. He'd been handed the lead when Richard punctured and, sensing victory, had broken away from Paul. John Samways had also benefited, moving up to third, but with Richard replaced inner tube and all, right on his wheel, he'd have to go some to stay there. The 6-mile lap finished with a fast, mile-long single-track descent, including rock steps to test the weary riders. Here, Sam made a clear break from Paul, finishing nearly 2 minutes up in 85 minutes and 35 seconds. Richard had passed John, but despite a desperate last descent, he could get no closer than 28 seconds to Paul. In the sportsmen, a familiar trio of Glenn Turner, David Boff and Scott Robinson led out the round 2 winner, Richard Cross. Yes, we finally found him. This descent became the main spectator point, not for the crashers of course, but for the riders' deep concentration as they headed down. And of course, those faces. You won't see this Trimble bike too often in Britain. It's a carbon Kevlar composite monotube frame, so there. In the women's race, Liz Eberl headed for her 3rd consecutive win. Despite her best efforts, Tracy Hardcastle for her 3rd consecutive second. This is Richard Cross's first season mountain bike racing. He's got a background in running but proved to be no novice on a bike, as yet again he moved well clear ahead of the rest of the field. Scott Robinson, great at the technical stuff, led the chase. With the sports race sponsored by Animal, the winner of the previous round wore the Animal kit, like a yellow jersey, which Richard would also wear in round 4 as he went on to win in 1.5 hours, 3 minutes ahead of Scott Robinson. With third place Anthony Bailey, 45 seconds down.
In the Pro Elite race, top American rider Michael Closer had heard the word about the course and came to give it a go ahead of the Aviemore Grundig race. But it was the series leader David Baker who led on the first wide grassy climb. And down the first descent, ahead of Barry Clark, Tim Gould, Mike Closer and Fred Salmon. While Paul Hinton, as usual, drew a cheer from the crowd as he flew down ahead of Chris Young. With no surprises either at the front of the experts, with Carl Sturgeon leading Julian Wynne, who moved from juniors to experts this year. With the amount of dust being kicked up, sitting on someone's wheel was not the most pleasant place to be. Janet Wilkinson overtook Sally Hibbert on the descent after they'd made a few seconds over the rest of the field. With classy descender Isla Roundtree tracing hard in third. The first half of the lap took the riders out onto the edge of Dartmoor, where, after a long gradual climb, they could swoop their way back down through the gorse. A third of the way through the race, and it was Tim, returning to his more accustomed position, who was leading the race. He had managed to ride the steeper section of the course when David and Barry, who had been with him, had had to dismount and run. Tim, obviously looking for revenge from Margam, grasped his opportunity, put the pedal to the metal and opened up a gap. Now he was back in full flow with a quick glance over his shoulder to check his lead. David, of course, took up the chase and broke away from the rest, but it was making no impression on Tim. While Mike was finding the hospitality somewhat lacking as his two leading hosts ran away from him. Barry found that for a change he had to be aware of riders behind him. Nicky Craig, in more like his 1990 form, was on his back wheel. Out of the woods, and the riders weaved their way through the trees and down the river for a third crossing. Tim had screamed through here, but it was a decidedly cautious David who came through in second after a serious tumble.
What's up, Dave?
Wipe me head.
Suffering mild concussion, David had to pull out. That left Tim well clear and enabled Mike to move into second.
Downhill in action.
Mike and Tim Davis had the rare experience of riding with a teammate. There are only 2 Alpine Stars riders. Perhaps inspired, Tim was gradually moving up the field. Having left the experts to eat his dust, Carl Sturgeon was working his way through the pro elites, having just passed Paul McWaters, the 1990s sports class champion. His nearest rival, Chris May, was already nearly 3 minutes down. Barry was to add to Rally's disappointment, having dropped down the field and eventually pulling out because of an ever-loosening headset. That left Paul to fly the rally flag. Back on the moor, and last year's champion Sally Hibbard looked back in form. She'd soon passed Janet and was now setting about establishing an unbeatable lead. Isla had also moved up and was again doing battle with Janet. Isla seems to have improved on her strength and stamina since last year. With only a fourth and third so far, Deb Morell yet again had a poor start to the season. Last year it contributed to the loss of her title, so she was after a definite improvement here. While her own Nikki Crowther, also without a decent result so far, looked like she too was beginning to return to form. Despite many people liking that the course seemed to go down more than up, there were a number of long drags as well as short, sharp climbs, though they didn't seem that short when he rode them. These no doubt gave Tim the chance to consolidate his lead. Mike went well in the last quarter of the race, but failed to do more than close the gap by a few seconds. Sally had started to relax out front, only to find that Deb was in sight, so she once again had to turn up the gas for a final effort. Tim was having a storming last couple of laps and had moved up into third, while Deb in second and only 45 seconds down had her sights on Sally. Deb's teammate Carl was causing many of the pros to look over their shoulders. He completed the 30 miles in 2 hours, 22 minutes and 37 seconds, 10 minutes ahead of the next expert, and with a time that would have placed him 5th in the Pro Elites. Another young man on form was Andy Gordon. Despite breaking his chain and eventually starting off again after all the experts, he finished 7th, 2 minutes ahead of the 8th man, Steve Dowse. Isla's tussle with Janet went all the way to the line. Janet had got back on terms, but the sprint finish went to Isla. With Nikki Crowther taking a good 5th. Tim looked every bit a winner, coming in 2 hours, 13 minutes, 32 seconds, 2.5 minutes ahead of Mike, while Mike's teammate and birthday boy Tim Davis was a further 4 minutes down in third despite having a puncture. In the women's race, Sally, determined not to lose her lead, had reopened the gap over Deb to 1 minute and 9 seconds, finishing the 24 miles in 2 hours, 19 minutes and 41 seconds.
Now coming into view, as you notice, in the background, Paul Rally Rider.
And for those who enjoy suffering for a good cause, there was the hill climb competition. The winner was the fastest to the top, but some didn't get that far.
This is the bike Tim Gould's going to be riding this season, built by Peugeot in a Canadian factory out of Ritchie Logic tubing. Ritchie Logic is a lightened version of Tange Prestige, TIG welded, very standard steel frame, geometry, 74 degree seat angle, 71 degree head angle. This particular one for Tim, 47 centimetre seat tube. He has quite a long top tube to get him a position similar to his road bike, very flat back. Handlebars and handlebar stems are by Ital Manubri, titanium handlebar stem, alloy bar. All the components on the bike are Campagnolo. Transmission, chain set, 175mm cranks, standard chain rings for normal races, 26, 36, 48. Medium arm rear gear mech with an 11 to a 28 8-speed freewheel. Between the two, a roll-off chain, which is a very flexible chain, able to cope with the wider spacing of an 8-speed freewheel. The pedals vary depending on the course. If it's mainly rideable, it'll use the Campagnolo pattern look clip-in pedals, which have got a grip on the back of the pedal. Wheels, 32-spoke Campagnolo cassette hub, Campagnolo Thor rims, DT stainless steel spokes. Tyres vary depending on courses. If it's quite fast, Ritchie Force Racing Ks. If it's a bit muddy perhaps, then Megabytes 2-inch or 2.1s. Campagnolo brakes, small cantilevers, Campagnolo thumb shifts. Usually one bottle cage on the seat tube. This means that he can pick the bike up by the down tube to put it on his shoulder if there's any running sections. This is the basic design, frame design and bike design that the whole of the team use. Very simple, very straightforward, no frills, just built for racing.
The rain was back for round 4, making the Saturday's downhill and observed trials very painful.
After torrential rain in the morning, it was a soggy junior field that started the day's racing on an extremely muddy Bosley course. It was soon clear that survival of the bike, as much as the rider, would determine the day's results. Apart from Christopher Fenter, who you just saw crash and break his collarbone, there were a number of other top riders who went down to one of cycling's most common injuries, including in the juniors Sam Humphrey, which left Richard and Paul out on their own. Which meant for the chasers, such as Nigel Parkinson, Alan Gunner and John Samways, there were extra points to be had for third. This is one of the best known courses in Britain, but it must have seemed very different in the mud, with formerly rideable bits now impossible. Richard would appear to do well on this sort of course, and by the end of the first lap had opened a small lead. Paul was trying to stay on terms, with Scottish junior Andrew Wright causing him concern from behind. Andrew was unable to make the earlier rounds as they were too far south for him. Further back in the trees, what had been a steep grass bank was becoming an unrideable mudslide, though some tried. A third of the way through the second and final lap of the 6-mile course, and Richard, on yet another muddy descent, had been caught by Paul, who was having a bit of bother, but not as much as Andrew, now drifting third. Or a few others. Paul's strong point is climbing, and he used it well to pull away from Richard on the main ascent to the top of the course, and with his first BMBF win in sight, he was determined to stay away. Eventually coming in 17 seconds ahead of Richard, with a time of 1 hour, 11 minutes and 37 seconds. The race for third was almost as close, with Alan Gunner passing Andrew in the final wooded section, coming in 22 seconds clear, just over a minute behind the winner, with Nigel Parkinson coming in fifth, a few more minutes down. I spoke to the first two.
Did you fall, Richard? Did Paul just beat you in the mud today?
I just didn't go fast enough.
You just didn't go fast enough. Paul, this is the first time beating Richard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are you surprised?
I'm pleased, but I have been after him for a while.
Better on the climb.
On the hill, I steamed up the hill for the attack.
Another steaming up the hill was round 3 winner Dave McMullen, who pulled out more than half a minute lead over the rest of the vets field in the very first few minutes of the race. Soon catching the tail-end vets were the sportsmen, led out by Richard Cross, with Glenn Turner right behind.
Come on, Adrian!
The rest of the field look as if they're out for a Sunday stroll. By the mudslide, it was a group of 3, Ray, Chadwick, Richard and Glenn, who were leading and had caught the first vet, Dave. We'll see more of this later, though it is worth noting how most of the riders thought just sliding down was the fastest way. But it didn't always work. Ray slowly pulled away from Richard, finishing 52 seconds clear in 1 hour, 12 minutes and 38 seconds. After his early efforts, Dave was able to take it easy at the end and still finish over 1.5 minutes up on second place, with Pete Tompkins getting third, his best result so far, though Jeff wasn't having a good day.
The sun came out for the last race as David Baker, despite having just finished a milk race, led up the first climb. Tim Gould and Adrian Timmis were sadly missing from the race due to broken collarbones collected on the milk race and at Vail in Colorado. Jason McCroy, winner of Saturday's downhill, was showing he could go uphill fast as well. He was leading the experts. Back in her winning way and on the same course where she scored her first major mountain bike victory in '89, Sally led out the pro elites. With Tim not racing and having failed to finish at Newnham, David was looking to notch up his third victory, but on the main climb the rest of the field were close behind. Barry Clark in second from Fred Salmon, Steve Barnes, the Peugeot amateur and Nicky Craig. Looking to have returned to his form of '89 after having glandular fever in 1990, Glenn Coltman was also well up. Chris Young there wanting his water bottle in the right place. He was just ahead of his teammate Richard. Yes, he's racing again. Is this boy a fool? Well, he did come 9th. Another junior up with the big boys was Carl Sturgeon, yet again well away in the experts, but he was shortly to retire with gear changer trouble. On the way back down, and David was unable to shake off his attendance, with Fred having moved up to second doing his duty for Peugeot. While their teammates Nicky and Barry were contesting third. However, both were shortly to retire, Barry due to bruised knuckles after an earlier tumble in the quarry. Raleigh were again leading both the men's and women's race, with Caroline Alexander, who had retired early in the Newnham race, ahead of Sally Hibbard, though once again the lead was small.
Let's go over the belt, Sally.
Third place Deb had an unpleasant surprise in the way the course had been cut up, with Sian right on her wheel. Lap 2 and all changed. Fred, who was looking strong, had passed his ex-teammate to take the lead. 2 weeks of non-stop, eyeballs-out riding in the milk race had obviously taken their toll on David. Chris had now moved up into third ahead of Steve Barnes, with little-known Ed Nicol, the Nordic skier, eventually coming in for an impressive fourth. Others moving up the field included Kevin Sabiston and Steve Dowse. In the expert men's, after Carl's retirement, Paul Mashida took first place, becoming only the second winner in the category this season. And now, looking for a second win of the season, Sally had got ahead of Caroline, who was having trouble with her SPDs in the mud. Closing on her was Deb, now comfortably in third with Sean's retirement. By the start of the final lap, Fred seemed assured of first place with nearly a 4-minute gap over the second rider, and that was now Chris Young, who had passed a very tired David in the woods. For David, it was now a matter of survival and just finishing. But it wasn't so clear-cut in the women's. The top 3 riders had come together. With Deb shortly to overtake Caroline, she had, however, left it too late to do anything about the leader. Sully came through to win by over 2.5 minutes in a time of 1 hour and 30 minutes. David's exhaustion was now complete, and he lost 2 more places in the final mile of the woods, with Steve Dowse moving into third. Fred eventually won by 4.5 minutes for his first major victory of the season and was well pleased.
About time. A long time coming.
As promised, more of the slide.
This is a GTX Lounge bike ridden by Jake Elliott and Andy Gordon this year on the circuit. It's made of titanium, which is some 40% lighter than steel, 60% stronger than aluminium. It's been TIG welded all over, and it has the unique feature of having the GT triple triangle, which is structurally superior. Effectively makes all the triangles smaller by adding an extra triangle, which will make the bike a lot stiffer. The bikes are equipped this year with Ritchie Racing K, or on some circuits the Megabytes. On the handlebars, using Answer taper lights with Onza titanium bar ends. The gearing is standard Shimano XT, but we use the thumb shifters. Full Shimano gear equipment throughout the bike, all XT, apart from the pedals, which we've gone to DX because we find these work adequately and they're better value for money. Other trick bits on the bike include ringlets for the quick releases. A lot of people say that titanium bikes are rather flexible, but on the GT we've completely eliminated that by using the triple triangle. So not only is it a fantastic handler, it also looks a dream.
By the 5th round, some riders were literally going over the top.
Up to Peebles in Scotland for the 5th round, and you will never guess which 2 are out in front in the juniors. Giving chase was Alan Gunner and an awful lot of flies, in case you wondered what the buzzing is. Consistency was also the order of the day in the sports race, with Richard Cross taking an early lead over Glenn Turner and Scott Robinson. For the main field, the most important thing was to keep your mouth shut. Towards the end of the first lap, Paul opened a slight lead over Richard, despite having to run some nasty sections where Richard rode. Alan in third noticed something about the course. But then that could be said for almost every race this summer. We didn't have much luck with the weather. And nor did Simon Dark. Well clear in the sports, Richard was on his way to his 3rd victory. And with a second place also to his credit, he became the series champion. In the Masters category, Mick Ives was heading for his third victory, in front of first vet Les. Despite the odd hiccup, Les soon overhauled Mick on his way to his first series win. The main field was having great fun with the descent. Another series champion was made at Peebles, as Liz Eberl took her fourth win in the sports women's category. In the juniors, Paul, way ahead, was in position for his second win, which turned the junior championship on its head from a one-horse race to a showdown in the last 2 rounds. John Samways moved to third for his best placing in the series.
With most riders having to travel a long way for this round, categories were generally smaller than normal, and it was a tight little pack of pro elite men that raced up the first climb. With a long fire track climb from the start, riders had the rare opportunity to see how their competitors were faring in a road-style peloton. And from the back, Nicky could see them all. Caroline moved away from the field on the climb, but by the bottom of the long grassy descent, a glance over her shoulder told her that Deb and Sian had closed the gap, and were only a handful of seconds behind. Close behind, Nicky had moved into fourth ahead of Janet, the bandage on her elbow protecting a bad gash that she'd picked up in the man v horse v bike marathon, which kept her out of the last round. On the muddy descent, David was looking a lot better than at Bosley. He had obviously recovered from the milk race. And this time it was Fred's turn to take an embarrassing tumble, which drew a large silence from the crowd and allowed Barry to close the gap. Kevin Sabiston coming down here gives you some idea of just how steep the slope is. And how muddy it is at the bottom. If you want any more proof, ask the women's leader, Caroline.